Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to my session on closing the feedback loop. We'll be using this idea of the feedback loop, something that if you caught the last session, Jeff, I think, talked about really effectively on the broader scale. But yeah, using this idea of a feedback loop to learn and build software faster. And we'll be looking at more kind of maybe some specific tools and strategies you can use as a developer to that end. But I think fair warning, most of the there'll be a little bit of code in the presentation. We'll be looking at some JavaScript and TypeScript, but I think even if those aren't kind of like the language that you use day to day, or even if you're not a programmer, hopefully you can still apply these ideas to whatever it is that you're working on and get some value there. So I guess to introduce myself, my name is Nic Wilson, and I'm a senior developer at Cloudburst SBC. We're a custom software development shop based here in the Twin Cities. And we work primarily with folks who are early stage entrepreneurs, maybe taking their idea from the drawing on the back of a napkin to getting that to the App Store. One thing I'll touch on really briefly is for folks who aren't familiar with the idea of SBC. It's a type of B Corp or benefit corp. So we file a specific benefit corp statement with the state of Minnesota every year, and part of as kind of the emphasis of that statement is we work with folks from underestimated communities to help them launch careers in technology, whether that's partnering with them as clients or as members of our team. And you can find me on the World Wide Web at haha.world, or I'll occasionally tweet at _hahaworld. And you can find some of the code samples from this talk on my GitHub at github.com/Nicholas L. Wilson. So coming back to this idea of a feedback loop, what's a feedback loop? I think it's probably something that most people have an idea of in their head. I don't know, maybe when you were a kid, you plugged in like the video camcorder to your TV and then pointed the camcorder to TV and kind of got like that cool infinite mirror effect. But essentially, I mean, kind of, what it boils down to is we have a system of inputs and outputs, and the outputs from that system feed back in as an input. And I think you maybe when you think about when you're learning to do something, you have this kind of feedback loop. Maybe you're practicing your golf swing, and you hit a drive and it goes left. You take that result and use it to make an adjustment in the next time around. I think the idea of feedback being important for learning and practice shows up a lot in research. K. Anders Ericsson, whose work I think has been kind of widely cited in things like Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers. I think he's famous for that kind of like that idea, like 10,000 hours to become an expert. But I think one of the things that I think is most important from his research is this idea of deliberate practice. And so it's a way of acquiring skills, acquiring expertise. And one of the important characteristics of deliberate practice is that you're practicing something specific, and you are getting kind of immediate informative feedback on your performance, and that is critical to improving your skills. Whereas if that feedback is delayed, the practice is less effective. So we have this idea of a feedback loop. You do something, you get a result. What does that have to do with programming? I think for a lot of us as programmers, what that looks like is maybe in an ideal world, we write a little bit of code and then we run the program, and we get the output from the program to decide what to do next. Does the program do what we wanted it to, or is it doing what we expect? And so we'll use that to in the process of maybe developing a feature. You'll go through this loop many times. But unfortunately, it's usually not quite that simple. Usually there's a few other steps, other than just running the code and or writing the code and running your program. So a lot of times maybe it looks more like this, where you write some code and then we wait for it to compile. Maybe it has to be deployed to a server to run, and then our app runs on the server, and we view those changes as using a website in a browser or something. Each of these kind of additional steps is delaying that process of getting immediate feedback from our actions. And I know I've worked on some projects where it gets even worse than this, where we were developing like a hybrid mobile app, and so we're using kind of the same JavaScript code base to deploy both like something to the web and also deliver native mobile apps. And so in that case, our feedback loop can sometimes end up looking like where we write some code and we compile our JavaScript and bundle it using Xcode and upload it to our kind of the platform we use for testing, Browser Stack, and install it on a native device, and then start maybe manually testing the app there. Only then to like realize that we made some mistake early on in this process. Maybe we built the app with the wrong configuration, or it can be like super frustrating, and it can lead to things that are maybe simple kind of tweaks. Maybe we're trying to just tweak a layout a few pixels to the left or the right, and having to go through all of these additional steps really slows it down and makes the process unenjoyable. And so what are some strategies and tools we can use to avoid that long feedback loop, deliver stuff faster, and in that process also maybe improve our skills as software developers better than we would if we're going through kind of these really long loops to get feedback. I think some great strategies are to take what you're doing and break it down into smaller pieces. Create a prototype in a sandbox, or do something in isolation that lets you focus on just the things you're working on, and start there before you try to maybe integrate it into the rest of your product. Automation is another really big thing. Having your unit tests running as you're developing, so you're getting that real-time feedback every time that your files save. Again, it's going to be a great way of getting real-time feedback. I'm a big fan of in-browser tools like Stack Blitz. A lot of times, if I'm testing out a new component library or kind of wondering how something works, I'll just I think a lot of developers are familiar with kind of Googling the search terms like Stack Overflow, foo bar. A lot of times I'll Google Stack Blitz foo bar, and someone will a lot of times have created an example that I can just view in StackBlitz and play around with. I think another really important tool is the ability to use something like static analysis. So that's when we're using some tool to get feedback on our code without having to actually execute our code. So we write everything in TypeScript at Cloudburst, and for me, it really has been kind of a night and day difference from earlier on in my career when I was editing JavaScript files, maybe just in a plain old text editor. And through the type annotations that we add to our code, the TypeScript compiler is able to give us that real-time feedback in our IDE while we're typing. It's kind of like autocorrect or spell check for our code. So kind of like in this example, it's saving me from making a silly mistake. I'm trying to assign a string to a property on a rectangle that should be a number, and it's saving me from having to actually go through the step of running my code to realize that something isn't lining up quite right here. I think the kind of interactive shell or read, evaluate, print loop is another really great tool for just conducting little experiments or trying to test our understanding of maybe a language feature. And I think it's something that will oftentimes be featured kind of in tutorials when you're first picking up a language, but maybe gets left behind once you kind of start writing actual programs and you start running those as opposed to using this interactive shell. But I think I will pretty much every day open up the JavaScript console in my browser, and if I'm trying to remember kind of how a certain language feature works or kind of just test something out, it's a super convenient way to do that, again, like kind of in isolation without having to go through a really long feedback loop to start getting feedback. It's interactive, and I'm getting feedback right away. Something else I'm a really big fan of is the VS Code debugger that gives me the ability to kind of set breakpoints in my IDE as I'm coding, and I think I'll jump over to VS Code now to take a look at that feature. So here in my VS Code launch configurations, I have kind of a special launcher here that will let me launch and debug the current file. So kind of show you what that looks like. I can hit F5, and I've started. Let's try that one more time. All right, so that's not working, but essentially what it gives me the ability to do is kind of set breakpoints in my IDE while I'm coding, and from there I can print stuff out to the debug console, but also set breakpoints to get kind of more in-depth and more in-depth view of like what's going on in my IDE. So taking a step back now, kind of to think about like what this might look like. Once you start kind of identifying these feedback loops, like your development process, you will, I think, oftentimes start seeing start seeing them everywhere in your life. Where, so kind of like the big brain idea is using kind of these feedback loops to optimize the way that you develop software. And then kind of like the galaxy brain idea is maybe identifying feedback loops in the processes that your team uses to find opportunities to collaborate and shorten the time that it takes to maybe start getting meaningful feedback. So I think there's things like the idea of left first testing, so that your QA folks are getting their eyes on things sooner in the process, identify potential issues rather than after it's handed off from the development team. Things like using Storybook.js or kind of component playgrounds to can be super useful, I think, to share components of your application that are under development with the product team or the client early on, maybe before like you even have maybe a full-fledged demo built out, so that you can start getting that client feedback maybe in the middle of the sprint or at the beginning of the sprint, rather than, again, waiting until after something's been handed off. And I think in the previous session, Jeff did a great job of kind of talking about like that's really, I think, one of the values of a lot of the kind of agile methodologies and DevOps. So that kind of wraps up what I kind of had planned for this session. Again, I'm a developer at Cloudburst SBC, and I'll tweet out a link to the slides. I'm not sure what happened with my kind of little tech demo there, but I also will get that fixed and pushed up to my GitHub so you can take a look at that. And yeah, I love talking about this kind of stuff, and encourage folks to reach out to me, and look forward to hopefully doing this in person with folks in Minnebar in the future. Thanks so much for your time, and look forward to connecting with folks online.